Why were famous musicians like John Denver, comedians like Abbott and Costello, adult film stars like Nicole Smith, and other famous figures like Walt Disney targeted by the FBI? Were they actually real threats to national security, or are these just prime examples of government overreach? Let's find out. We're starting off with folk musician John Denver, most famous for Take Me Home Country Roads. Yes, the FBI has a file on him, and it's pretty sizable too, 33 pages, dating from 1977 to 1990. But what could the FBI have possibly been snooping on John Denver for? Well, mainly he'd attended a 1971 anti-war rally. Apparently, that's all it takes to pique the FBI's interest in you. On top of that though, they were apparently keeping tabs on him for his use of illicit substances. You can guess which ones. A famous 70s musician using illicit substances? Unheard of. Out of all the rock stars from this time period, John Denver wouldn't really be the first I'd picture having a huge FBI file on him for his use of recreational substances. To be fair, also included in this file is information about death threats John Denver had received from a German woman in 1979 who said that her mother's boyfriend was going to come to America and kill him. Apparently she made like 17 of these threats. Abbott and Costello caught the attention of the FBI, if you can believe it. Now, as you can imagine, most of the celebrities on this list were targeted for political reasons, especially during the Cold War. Abbott and Costello had FBI files for different reasons though. Really, one reason, and it's pretty silly, actually kind of perfect for a classic comedy duo like this. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello were apparently big fans of adult films, and J. Edgar Hoover, first director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was coming down hard on skin flicks. The LAPD apparently shared a report with the FBI that Abbott had about 1,500 reels of adult films which he'd often screen at his home for friends. Costello also had a bunch of dirty movies. I'm not sure what this FBI file would have looked like. I mean, how long can you possibly talk about two men owning a bunch of lewd movies? Not very. Moving on. Speaking of adult films though, Nicole Smith had the FBI on her tail too. They investigated her from 2000 to 2001. Now, unlike Abbott and Costello, this was not because of her involvement in the adult industry. Smith had been married to a man named J. Howard Marshall. He was an oil tycoon who of course collected quite a bit of wealth over his career. Just over a year after they got married though, J. Howard Marshall died. Not surprising though, as he was an 86-year-old man. I'm sure Nicole Smith wasn't all that shocked either. According to Smith, her late husband had promised to give her half of his estate. Only this wasn't in writing, it was just a verbal contract. So Smith and her late husband's son, E. Pierce Marshall, got into a legal battle over the millions of dollars the old man had left behind, but that's not what got the FBI involved. The FBI took interest in the case when an apparent plot on E. Pierce Marshall's life came to light. And of course, Nicole Smith was now a suspect. There was never enough evidence to actually put her behind bars though, so nothing ever really came of this. Arthur Miller was a famous playwright and screenwriter, known for works like Death of a Salesman and The Crucible, but he's also famous for having been married to Marilyn Monroe. The two had been having an affair before they got married, and it was around this time when the FBI began looking into Monroe, mainly because Arthur was suspected of being a commie. He even got tangled up with the House Un-American Activities Committee, but stood his ground and refused to rat anyone out. Meanwhile, 20th Century Fox was heavily advising Monroe to break up with Miller, but she refused and ended up getting into hot water with the FBI herself. They opened a file on her and kept keeping tabs on her as she applied for a visa to go to the Soviet Union and was apparently spotted with other people linked to communism, like a Life magazine photographer who was supposedly in the party. Next up, we have legendary baseball player Jackie Robinson. Born in 1919, he broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball when he joined the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. This made him the first African-American player in the modern era of Major League Baseball. He also went on to be heavily involved in the civil rights movement, which caught the attention of the FBI. In the 40s and 50s especially, the FBI was deeply involved in investigating civil rights activists, suspected communists, and just anyone else who were perceived as threats to national security. Robinson was outspoken about racial injustice and was associated with a number of left-leaning organizations. His file mentions his involvement with groups like the International Workers' Order in Harlem, which was seen as a communist organization, and the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. J. Edgar Hoover opened a file on Charlie Chaplin in 1922. Apparently it's huge, too, about 2,000 pages. The FBI had been keeping tabs on him for years, between 1922 and 1978. That is a very long time, and I thought it was all just going to be political stuff. It mostly is, but there is a disappointing fact in here that I kind of wish I never knew about Chaplin. One of the reasons the feds took interest in him is because he'd been in an affair with a woman named Lita Gray. Chaplin was 35 at the time, and she was less than half his age by 2 years, so do the math on that. Yeah, definitely sucks. But then there were all his apparent communist ties, which some believe made him a threat to national security. The United Kingdom's MI5 even spied on Chaplin for a time. Then in 1952, he was refused entry back into the United States after a trip to London, so he and his wife moved to Switzerland, where he lived until he died in 1977. The FBI also had their eyes on I Love Lucy star Lucille Ball. But, I mean, what could they have possibly wanted with one of the most beloved figures in entertainment history? Well, once again, this mostly had to do with the Red Scare. Lucille Ball was not only left-leaning, but she was suspected of being a full-on commie sympathizer when it came out that she had registered to vote as a Communist Party member in 1936. She'd also been appointed to be a delegate to the party's State Central Committee. All seems pretty cut and dry, right? Well, in 1953, she testified to the House Un-American Activities Committee that she'd only listed her affiliation as communist because her grandfather had requested her to do so, and that she was never actually going to vote communist. She also said she'd been appointed to be a delegate without her knowledge. The FBI ended up not seeing her as any real threat and didn't include her in their security index. The FBI targeted Helen Keller for a whole list of things. Keller was an influential author, speaker, and advocate for people with disabilities. She was born in 1880 in Alabama and became deaf and blind while she was just 19 months old after falling ill. So she had quite the uphill battle, especially for the time, but ended up becoming the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. But her political affiliations and activism also caught the attention of the FBI all the way back to the 1930s. She was considered a radical, especially for the time. She supported birth control. She was a co-founder of the American Civil Liberties Union. She had been heavily opposed to President Woodrow Wilson. And not only was she involved with left-leaning organizations, she was a self-proclaimed socialist. The FBI had their eyes on actress Jean Seberg from 1968 to 1979. This case is very sad, like just downright cruel. Pretty unbelievable that this happened. Jean Seberg was an American actress who became famous in the 60s for her roles in films like Breathless, really becoming an icon for her work in French cinema. She had a pretty successful career, but she isn't just remembered for her acting. She was also involved in a number of social and political causes. She supported civil rights and Native American rights groups and donated to organizations like the Black Panther Party. Her activism drew the attention of the FBI and the FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, which was designed to monitor and disrupt perceived threats, began targeting her and target her they did, heavily. Not only was there stuff like wiretapping involved, but Seberg would also report being stalked on a number of occasions. The FBI even set out to discredit and publicly shame her by spreading false rumors. In 1970, they planted a fake story in a gossip column claiming that a member of the Black Panther Party, not Seberg's husband, had fathered her child. This caused incredible stress for her to the point where she ended up giving birth prematurely, and her offspring died soon after the birth. Of course, she was absolutely devastated, and the harassment and psychological torment just made things even worse and took a serious toll on their mental health. And finally, we have Walt Disney himself. Now, I'm kind of cheating with this one. Walt Disney was technically not the one being spied on, but he was involved with the FBI from 1933 all the way up until his death. Disney provided info to the FBI as an informant. His relationship with the FBI began back in World War II, really, when he became a friendly acquaintance of J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover admired Disney's patriotism and conservative values and their shared distrust of communism. And in the years following the war, Disney continued to maintain close ties with Hoover and the FBI. He provided info to the Bureau about folks in Hollywood who he believed had communist sympathies or were involved in leftist activity. In return, Disney was allowed to shoot on FBI property and, of course, had protection from all the political suppression going on at the time. Alright, with all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.